This is Car Policy, and this is our second episode of Car Policy. And, you know, something that's a huge part of all of our lives has been entrepreneurship these last, 12 years since I've known these two guys. But, you know, my entrepreneurship started back when I was a kid. But the big project for me was like I'd done different entrepreneurial projects, you know, when I was a kid, when I was a teenager. Early 20s. But the big thing that came along was in 2009, I had this idea. It was just this crazy idea that hit me out of nowhere. And I was sitting on a beach in Vancouver, Canada, trying to think. It was at this like crossroads in my life, and I wasn't sure what I was going to spend the rest of my life doing. And my career up to that point had all been like entertainment. It had been in the music business. And I was sitting there on this beach, and everything had fallen apart in my life. My entire life had just fallen apart back in California. I was up visiting my grandmother in Vancouver.
With your grandma, right?
Yeah, I was living with my grandmother in White Rock, place you know pretty well.
Yeah, no one wants to live with their grandmother.
No, man, I was 30 years old living with my 92-year-old grandmother in White Rock, British Columbia, Canada.
How was the food?
Terrible. Terrible. Like I didn't like, it's just, you know, she's 92, right? And so I would sneak out at night and go get burgers after we had dinner. But anyways, so I'm total crossroads, and I was trying to get, like, I was applying to business school because I thought that would be a good way to kind of restart life.
Was that Cambridge?
Yeah, it was Cambridge.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't, you know, all I wanted to do was go to Cambridge. And I didn't even really know why. I just knew I wanted to get an MBA because I thought if I got an MBA at the age of 30, it would give me a chance to kind of press a reset button on my life, expose me to a lot more options. And that's really, in many ways, what an MBA is for. A lot of people that do an MBA, they do it because they really don't know what they're doing for their life. They want to do something else than what they've been currently doing. And it's kind of this, I've been in my career for like 8-10 years. Maybe it's time for a change. And, you know, people want to go back to school, and this is a good chance. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go get an MBA. And the only school in the whole world I wanted to go to was Cambridge, England. My brother had gone to Oxford. And so I thought it would be a really great experience. And I'd grown up living in Germany, like for high school. And I missed living in Europe. And I'd spent these last 6-7 years living in California, and I wanted to get back to Europe. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to apply to Cambridge. But anyways, I'm sitting there on this beach one day at English Bay, and I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I thought, well, maybe I'm going to go work at Apple in the iTunes project because I was really into Apple, really into iTunes. And I thought, okay, I could work within that group. You know, I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And all of a sudden I was sitting there thinking, okay, what am I into? And I was like, well, I love travel. Who doesn't? But I really loved like road trips. I would like driving around. Like my favorite thing to do in the world is to be in a fast car, zooming somewhere out into the middle of the desert or the Pacific Northwest with nothing to do but going in on adventures.
You're happiest on the road for sure.
Always happiest on the road. Mm-hmm. So road trips, it was a huge thing that I love. Number 2, just being with friends. And my best friend that I had been living with in California was this kind of big, like linebacker type, all-American guy who spoke perfect Chinese. And I was thinking, man, I like to travel, love hanging out with my buddy Jeremy, and I love entertainment. And so I was like thinking, like, man, what could I possibly do? And then lightning struck my brain. It was like this epiphany. Hit me so hard. And I was like, obviously, I know what I'm going to do. What I want to do is take Jeremy and I, drive across the United States in a car on a giant road trip, and have him speak in perfect Chinese, you know, talking about what the United States is like, and then go and share that to a Chinese audience.
And this was 15 years ago, right?
2009? Oh, this is 2009. So this was pretty cutting edge at the time. And the idea of like, I mean, it had just been the Olympics in China, but China had not really opened up the way it is now, or the way it was even several years after that. And so the idea of like, wow, I could actually take a camera, take my buddy who speaks perfect Chinese, and he even had like a master's degree in Chinese language and education. And I was like, and he's this really cool, fun guy. And I was like, what if he were to show off different parts of American culture, show off different foods in different states, and, you know, where to go, and just have a lot of fun. But essentially it would be a job that I'm putting together for myself to go and hang out with my best friend, cruising around the country, road tripping and filming, and then finding some sort of way to broadcast that into China or to put it on a web page. I didn't know how I'd distribute it, but I just loved this kernel of an idea. And anyone I talked to at the time, I'd tell them about this. I'm like, what do you think? And I just kept getting really great responses. People saying, wow, that's a really interesting idea. That's really cool. And I realized through the process of coming up with that idea that I could market anything I wanted to the Chinese. I could market, destinations in the United States. I could market different products, shoes or cars or hotels, airlines, Visa, MasterCard. The sky was the limit. And so
I'm sure everyone listening to this is like, this sounds like a reality show, but it's not a reality show. I mean, reality was so crazy at the time. I mean, reality had really found its home in so many people's lives at that time. But no. We wanted to do something that had a lot of narrative and intelligence behind it, and something a little more intellectual, a little bit more based in reality, not reality.
Yeah,
genre.
I wanted this show initially to be about friendship, first and foremost.
A scripted show.
Well, kind of soft scripted. I wanted it to be about friendship between the characters. Initially it was just going to be me and Jeremy and a camera. But what ended up happening is that I did get into Cambridge, and that's a long story in and of itself that I'll tell at some point. But once I got to Cambridge and I started sharing this idea with some of my Cambridge classmates who were Chinese, I got really good feedback from them, and they were like, this is phenomenal. The Chinese would love to see a show like this. There's a huge appetite for all things American at this point. And they would love to see not the Hollywood version of China, of America, but what it's really like to interact with Americans.
The places in between the places that they know.
Yeah.
Back when it was original to say authentic.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
authentic version back before authentic became authentic.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And so what it was is I had this professor at Cambridge who was a Chinese national. He's from Shanghai. And he goes, this is I pitched him the idea one day towards the end of the school year. And I said, I have this idea for a show. What do you think about this? And he goes, I have someone for you to talk to. And he dialed this lady right there and then on the phone. And he goes, tell her what you just told me. And so I gave the whole pitch again. Going to make this show. We're going to make it all around the United States, eating barbecue, jumping out of planes, just road tripping, having a great time. Put this into China. And she goes, hey, I'm a producer at the BBC here in London. Why don't you come down? I'd love to talk about this. She goes, what you're saying is right up my alley. And so sure enough, I skipped school the next day, went straight down to the BBC, sat with who became a very close friend, Gene. And Gene and I sat there and we just riffed the rest of the afternoon about ways the show could be made. And she was like, instead of making it about just you and your buddy Jeremy, we should make it into an actual television show. And I hadn't thought about it as a television show. I'd only ever thought about it as like a web series or something like. I didn't think there was any chance I could put a television show onto the air in China. And she said, no, you can. She goes, with my connections in China, you're going to be able to do that. And I remember leaving that meeting, going back to my dorm and just like floating home. And I ran into a bunch of my friends at the pub like the next day. They were all having like just finished exams or whatever. And I showed up and I was telling them about how I just had this landmark meeting at the BBC. And we just kind of all celebrated, and it was a huge night. And I just couldn't get over how much life had changed in the space of a year before, living with 92-year-old grandmother. And then all of a sudden I'm sitting here in Cambridge, talking about making a television show for China. And so next thing you know, Gene, myself, and my buddy Jeremy, the three of us fly to China just after school finishes. Like I fly the three of us out to go and see what the appetite is in China for the show.
Have you ever been to China before?
No, I had never been to China before. I didn't know what to expect. I mean, I'd grown up in Japan when I was a kid, but that was on a, Okinawa Marine Corps base back in the early 80s. And here all of a sudden I'm flying into Beijing, China with, luckily enough, Jeremy's there. He speaks Chinese and understands Chinese culture. And then Jean, we met up with her there, and it was had no idea what to expect. It was like stepping completely into a different life. 2 years before I was playing, in a rock band in Southern California. And next thing you know, I'm in China wearing a suit and tie in the middle of the summer in August of 2010, pitching television stations, in Beijing about here's this idea for a show. And at the time I called it American Road Trip.
American Road Trip.
Yeah. And I had all these, I had this whole deck that I had built with like photos of people fishing or being in the bayou with alligators.
Yeah, we've seen it. We've seen that deck.
Was it printed out or was it on your
No, it's just on my laptop.
Okay.
Oh yeah, it was. It was
rudimentary.
pretty rudimentary. I was going to let you say it, not me. But
It was bad.
But it set a really good example for us because the three of us became excellent deck makers over the subsequent decade. So it became a good baseline for us from which to only advance from and improve upon. Good, but a good thing I didn't see that when I first met you, because I don't know if I would have believed you and give you all the credit
deck, bro.
that I give you now. I don't know if I would have given you back then.
You would have zero respect. Anyone would have zero respect for me if they saw this
It just goes to show you that you got to do what you do best and leave that other stuff.
I'm not a deck maker. No. You guys are
the
good at
visuals.
it.
It also goes to show what the importance of a deck is. If it wasn't that actually impressive of a deck, what was the most impressive thing that you were pitching to these producers?
Yeah, I remember sitting across from this producer. He was one of the heads of a channel called Hainan Weishi, Hainan Television, kind of the travel channel of China. And at the time, they had a viewership of 300 million people had subscription to their channel. And I was walking him through the deck, and I was talking to him, through translation. So Gene was translating everything. And at this point, Jeremy had left China. He was only able to stay with me for a few days. I ended up spending the whole month there with Gene and the two of us going around pitching. And in this kind of final meeting, it was like I was kind of running low on mental. It was that month in China was very challenging. I was kind of living out in the sticks, and
because you're fresh out of college, right?
Fresh out
you
of-
have no money.
I had no money. I was broke, man. I was using tuition money, like my final tuition check, to be able to keep be
Really?
able to stay
It's
in
too
China.
bad you weren't
that's
doing
a long
this
story
now
too.
because
Holy crap, I didn't know about that.
Dude, I take monster risks.
I know.
That's kind of my thing. One of the themes you're going to see in all of our podcasts and stories and things is I take big risks.
We don't advise them, but
No, we should have little kind of parental warnings, disclaimers, because I took big risks. Instead of paying my final check for tuition, I went and booked myself and Jeremy and Gene a month in, or
you flew down Gene.
I flew out to China.
Okay, you flew her out?
Yeah, I flew Jeremy, Gene, and I, all three of us. I flew Jeremy from Utah, Gene from London, and myself from London.
Crazy.
And we all met up there and stayed in the Yosemite Hotel outside.
it's too bad you didn't
outside
just
Beijing.
film all of this pitching and hustling, because this looks like
I did.
It would have been a good show in and of itself.
I did film it all.
beyond the show that you were pitching.
That's the thing, is I filmed all this stuff. Like, what most people don't know is all the stuff I've done, like TikTok and Instagram, like filming and doing these things. I mean, that's Sam that's doing it all now. But for the last 21 years, I filmed little vignettes of every element of my life. And so when I was on that China trip, Jeremy and I filmed a lot of content. So I have actually a ton of content.
Yeah,
that
you should just stitch it all together and just pop it on
Yeah,
YouTube.
no, we totally should at some point. But it was the most incredible month in China. It was being in these meetings that I was way in over my head, and I was, trying to make my experiences in Hollywood sound way bigger than they actually were. I was trying to really give off that I could make
You were
this
a
show.
professional.
Yeah, I was doing my best to pitch. But the thing is I believed that I could make all these things happen.
Of course.
And actually, it's funny from a baseball perspective. I remember that that one of my slides had like me hanging out with, it was going to be me, Jeremy, hanging out with Ken Griffey Jr. in like Seattle, and then going out and getting some food or whatever.
Going on a fishing boat.
Yeah, on a fishing boat.
Yeah.
And that was a deck that I had built in 2009, and then here I was like the last couple of years hanging out with Ken Griffey Jr. and I talked to him about this. I was like, we should go do something like this. And he's like, sounds good. Mm-hmm. So that's really a funny kind of thing, how it ties together. But so I ended up signing a deal with that Chinese television station completely unprecedented. They wanted me to make like 52 episodes of this thing, like one for every week of the year.
Unprecedented, I remember being a very key buzzword on
Big one.
I don't know how many times that made an appearance in our decks.
Every deck used the word unprecedented an unprecedented number of times.
And then cutting edge was the other one.
Cutting edge.
Also, I just want to further
cutting edge.
I want to further clarify one thing. Deck. I mean we use that term so loosely, but we're not saying dick. We're saying deck. And when we say deck, we mean PowerPoint presentation. Okay, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah,
like
you know,
those presentations you make in high school or in college to present a project or an
PowerPoint
idea.
presentation.
A PowerPoint presentation is more or less. Deck is our shorthand, but it is a common shorthand for people in business.
But not everyone uses
But
it.
not everybody knows that term.
It is, yeah, that's true. But and if you're me, you're an Apple aficionado, which means it's keynote.
Yeah, even less people know that.
Yeah, exactly. So here I was in China for a month, and I'm flying back to England, having signed a deal, like an MOU deal with the Travel Channel of China. And I thought for certain
Memorandum of Understanding.
now that thank you, Colin. Now that I have this semi contract with a television station in China, I thought, okay, I've made it. I've done it. All I have to do is go back to England, walk into a bank, and somebody's going to give me a loan against it.
That happened, right?
I remember I walked into this bank. It was like Barclays Bank, and I thought, I have this MOU, this memorandum of understanding, an LOI from a channel
Letter of
in
intent.
China. Oh yeah, you got to help me with these buzzwords. Or vernacular. But I thought that it was actually potentially bankable because it had, it was like, you do this many of episodes, we're going to pay you this amount of money. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm about to have crazy tens of millions of dollars. Oh, I'm going to be so rich. So I walked into a bank, and an English banker humbled me so hard. He sat me down. He's like, dude, this isn't even close to bankable. You're going to have to get this, and this if you have a even remote shot at being able to make money from this thing. He's like, you have so many hurdles ahead you don't even know. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to show you.
Especially since it's uncharted territory and you're doing something
Totally
unprecedented, doing something totally never done. So there's no reference point
Yeah,
for
I
a
had
banker to
no
be like,
idea
oh,
what
I
to
see
do.
this formula works. Totally.
I had no idea what to do.
I would have done the same thing if I were him or her.
No, this banker was completely correct. And I remember licking my wounds after I left, and I was like, okay, this is going to be more challenging than I thought. And so I was like, well, I got to do some fundraising because I was completely out of cash. In fact, I was overspent because I'd already spent my last tuition check on getting myself out to China and doing all that work. And that month in China just wrecked me. It was like the craziest meetings I've ever had. Like, it was such a memorable time. But here I have this, this contract with China. I remember so many people telling me, you're never going to be able to do this. It's impossible. You'll never get a show on the air in China. You'll never be able to do this, that, and the other. You'll never get a contract with China. You'll never get funding for it. And I took all those things as like personal challenges because I believed this show was possible. I believed that I could make this thing happen. And it was a matter of like strategic, tactics and how I'd be able to do it. And over the next, couple of years, actually it's a crazy story. I actually ended up getting this show into production. Then I was completely embezzled. Somebody stole all of my cash. So I had to go away for a couple of years and then go raise new money and go start it all over again. And then 2017, we go and finally make the pilot episode of the show that I actually wanted to make. And so
A much more slimmer version, but a more efficient version.
a version
and a better
I'm much
version.
happier with, and I loved it.
The other one was bloated.
I love the show that we ended up making.
The one that we ended up making was the right version at the time.
So we went from 2009 to 2017.
Yeah.
You got investment.
I did get investment.
to help you to make this show.
Yeah, it took a while. In fact, I remember not asking a single person for $1.
You didn't ask anyone?
No, I
for
didn't
it?
ask anyone for money. I remember in 2010, when I came back from China, 2010 and 2011, I would tell people about what I was doing. One of my closest friends in business school, Italian guy, Nicola, I remember I was telling him about what I was doing, and I was like, dude, I'm so out of cash. And he did the kindest thing ever for me. And he just said, you've been talking about this show the last year and a half or so. I want to see you at least kind of get this thing off the ground to a certain degree. I'm going to give you 4,000 pounds. So like, I don't know, $5,000 or $6,000. And he's like, I'm giving you this loan to get you started. Because he's like, the first thing, obviously the first thing you're going to need to do is make a pilot episode to be able to show advertisers and marketing groups, media
And
buyers,
broadcasters.
and everyone what the show actually looks like. It's one thing to show a deck. It's another to actually, to do this thing right. And so Nicola gave me my first like 5,000 or 6,000. And I remember just being like, oh my gosh, now I can like,
Was that enough?
do this thing. No. And then I started every single day. I was living in London at this point. I'd walk down to this like library, and I'd go and sit in the library from like early morning to all the way to evening. And every single day I would write, I was working on a business plan, and I ended up writing like a 70-page business plan, like every element of what I'd learned in business school of like marketing plan, the financial plan, the one sheet, like the executive summary, all the different questions I could possibly be asked, charts and graphs and, images. And I ended up putting this entire thing together. I changed the name of the show from American Road Trip to Road Trip America, which you guys know so well. You guys have the t-shirts, you have the sweatshirts. And yeah, so I ended up taking that plan and I passed it on to a few friends. And they came back to me and said, I'd like to invest in this thing. So that's why I say didn't ask anybody for money, is that people started saying, hey, this is a really cool idea.
Wait, are you telling me that people actually took the time to read 70 pages? Or was your executive summary so impactful and compelling that people are like, I don't got to read anymore.
What sold them?
Yeah.
Because no one's
it was
going to
that.
take
Yeah.
4 or 5 hours and read all that.
Yeah. No, there was only ever one person that read the whole thing. Nate.
It's kind of like a box you just have to check, right?
Yeah.
And I just want to clarify too, because we know you and we know what your business was all about. Was the tourism element involved in
Not
this?
at this point.
Not at
this point.
When did that come into play?
That was the next year. Yeah.
So 2010?
2000, the tourism creeped in 2011. Mainly 2011.
And for people that don't know, do you want to kind of explain that?
Yeah.
portion of the business?
So initially, the whole idea of making revenue from this thing and making a bunch of money is here I'm broadcasting this show into China, and I'd get American, not Chinese advertising, but I'd get Americans wanting access to China. So if you're the state of, let's say, North Carolina, and you want to be able to show off the state to the Chinese audience to have a bunch of tourists come over, you would, sponsor an episode. So you'd provide sponsorship dollars, as well as groups like, I'd approach car companies and airlines and hotels and every possible, watch brands, clothing brands. There's so much money that could be made from having all these brands sponsor a show and doing that in what's called branded content in a really compelling way that made everything look really seamless. And because I was the only person doing this, it was, as far as selling this idea, is usually when I would start telling them about, we're not making money from the Chinese, we're making money from the Americans. All of a sudden that would make people go, oh, because at this time, nobody made money from China. You could not make money from China. The Chinese made, money off Americans, but the Americans weren't making money from the Chinese. So I had to come up with a business plan where it was the Americans that were paying me for the access to put it into China, because this was the only television show that was going into China from the West. As far as I know, I'm the first person, to ever get a signed contract for making television and broadcast into China. As far as I know, I'm the only person that's ever done that, which is pretty crazy.
And you had a lot of supporting evidence too for investors who want to get involved. You're like, well, look, they spend more money than anyone else in this country when they tour in America by a factor of 2 at least.
Yeah.
And the evidence is there that Chinese want to spend here. So why not encourage even more through interesting, compelling narrative on television? Intertwining and weaving in aspects of Ford or an Apple product or a hotel stay or a watch brand. They're already on their way over here. Just, give them a little nudge.
It wasn't a challenging kind of
concept to understand.
And the tourism element was really interesting because it really bothered me how much, the only Chinese tourists I'd ever seen coming into America, it was always a bunch of, a whole busload of Chinese coming off a bus at like Hollywood Boulevard, coming to see the Dolby Theater or where the Oscars are done and all that kind of stuff. And you'd see like a lady with a little white flag and all these Chinese following her around like a bunch of ducks. And just, there's nothing remotely interesting about that. That's not America in the slightest. I wanted people in China, China's really just opening up, to be able to see how things are here, but for real. I wanted them to go off the beaten track.
Because 2009 too, there was a big boom in Chinese tourism too, correct?
It was just starting to boom. It was really just starting to hit. And so I had this idea. I remember I was sitting in China in 2011, and I was at this dinner with Jean and a bunch of her family and friends. And I was sitting next to this guy, and he goes, I love going to the United States. But he goes, every single time I've gone, I've been to New York and Washington, D.C., and I've only done the bus tours. And I said, well, what do you want to do? And he goes, man, I would do anything to be in like a convertible Mustang, to be driving out into the desert with a cowboy hat, going to a rodeo, eating some barbecue. He goes, I would do anything for that. And that's when my, entrepreneurial brain went, what exactly would you give for that? And he's like, I'd pay whatever it took to make that happen. And I was like, do you think there's other people like you that would pay whatever it took to make that happen? And he goes, yeah, I do. I think there's a lot of people that want to have authentic experiences. I said, if I were to match you with, let's say my buddy Jeremy, who speaks perfect Chinese, and I matched you with him, and it was just you, he, and I rented us a convertible Mustang, and I took you out into the desert, and we went to a rodeo. Would you pay some serious cash for that? He goes, I would pay. There is no amount of money I wouldn't pay for that. And so that's when the company really went from being about just a television show to being a television show broadcast into China, and then a tourism company where people that are watching the show can live the show. And so the tourism people that I wanted to hire were not like your normal tour guides. They weren't Chinese tour guides. They were Americans that spoke their language. So I wanted some American from West Virginia to be able to show around West Virginia in the native language of the person coming to visit them. I still think it's the most badass business plan ever.
To even further entrepreneurialize the idea, the concept is like, obviously, this is a replicable concept. Just swap out China for any country, and then you have a global media empire.
Yeah, that was the plan. The plan was to do it for China and then immediately replicate it for India.
That should be the straw that breaks the back for all these investors who are like little unsure. Like, whoa, oh, wait a second. You telling me I can do this with Germany, India, Canada? I mean, you name it.
Yeah,
That's
every
just
country
crazy,
for
though,
every
'cause
country.
It's crazy though. It just started with a web series though. You're sitting on a log in English Bay, and you're like, I'll do a web series, and then it turns into this massive undertaking. Truly, a huge company.
Yeah. And I was only 30, 31, 32 when I started all this.
That must have been very overwhelming. So, because everything is new territory.
Yeah, everything I was doing was new territory.
That's scary.
I got a line from my brother that always impacted me, and it was the line of, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. And so that's how I always approached business and entrepreneurship is, I always knew that there was monster challenges to get from where I was to where I wanted to be. But as long as I could see where I wanted to be, then I could slice that up into manageable bite-sized bits and start making my way exactly where I wanted to be. And I had to go through hell to make that happen. Like, those were a lot of not fun days. I ended up living in China for like a year to go and make this happen. I ended up having an embezzlement against me over a period of years, a very sophisticated embezzlement that, I want to share this whole story, but that's kind of the beginning of how this whole thing started of Sixtus. The company was called Sixtus, Sixtus, which is an old family name. And then in 2012, I ended up making this television series happen. And that's where I met Colin and Sam. Because Colin was working as our first assistant director. Sam was our location scout. And it's an incredible story how I even met these guys.
Second AD.
Oh, you were second AD.
But
that's right.
I was just thinking about like all this sacrifice and you being in the point you just made about, I was in my early 30s when I was doing all this. And I was like, well, really that age, that's that golden, that like early golden age is the time when you have. So I don't mean to generalize, but so many people they don't really quite maybe have a family yet, or they don't have a lot of the obligations that so many people have. So you can take these massive, massive risks and that's what you did. I mean, I don't want to discourage anyone who's maybe 65 and wants to pursue a career, but I just think that there's something to say about being that age.
Yeah.
And Sam's 30, and you were around Sam's age when you started everything. And not to put a light on it, the discrepancies in age here, but there is a discrepancy in age. But I think also that adds a lot of benefit to our thing anyway. But that's a different story. But I just think that being 30 and being totally just, I don't care what happens to me, kind of feeling, and there's a sense of invincibility there too, and leveraging your risk to such a degree where it's worth pursuing.
Mm-hmm. You must have been so hungry at 30.
Man, I was starving. I was starving for success, starving for cash, physically starving at times.
Believe it.
And I stayed in some ridiculously terrible places with horrible conditions to make this thing happen. Like when I think back and what I was willing to put up with at 30 and 31 and what I'm willing to put up with now, there's a great, degree of separation there. There's things that I'm not willing to do now that I was more than willing to do back then, if it meant making my dreams happen. So yeah, a huge part of this story, and frankly, the next, 15 years or whatever of doing this entrepreneurial thing with, at least with these guys and with Sixtus and then with Mint, it was about sacrifice. That's why one of the, I always tell new people coming into the company, at least in the early stages, I'd always be like, the things I respect most are things like sacrifice and risk and endurance and taking something the whole way, because those are values that really mattered to me along my whole path. And so those became the things I respected most. And so I really respect those in other people. But yeah, it was making this whole thing happen, having it fall apart, and then making it happen again. I told my friend Ammon this story this week, and he's like, dude, if this isn't turned into a movie of your embezzlement and then the rise again, then you're doing a disservice. And so I'm looking forward to sharing more about this, but, let us.
There are versions of the story that are 5 minutes long, 10 minutes. This was maybe a 20-minute version. There's a 4-hour version. I've shared this story and its intimate details, as intimate as I can be, being one person removed from so much of it, to people in the film industry and people in Hollywood, I guess. And numerous people have said, oh my God, this has got to be a movie. This has got to be a movie. You got to cast this. You got to write this story. I hope you took notes. I hope you throughout this experience, because it's so compelling. I mean, it's like Argo meets, come on, help me out. Social Network. We've made a lot of different comparisons over the years, but it
Argo's
needs to happen. And luckily for us, we're dealing here with Brian is a self-proclaimed digital pack rat, so he likes to every day light a candle and go upstairs and put his open his document and journal about the happenings of the day.
Yeah, I do that except without the candle.
And he's done that. I've seen a candle. He's done that
21 years.
Yeah, for so many.
That's insane.
And I don't think he's missed a day, or maybe he has a couple.
I haven't missed a day in the journal in 21 years.
So there's your material for the screenplay.
That's what
right
Ammon
there.
and I were talking about.
I mean, anyone that wants to write this will learn that, and they're gonna froth at the mouth. They're gonna be like, oh my God, you have everything I need.
And I filmed everything too.
Yeah, you have everything I need.
I have filmed 10,000 video clips over the last 21 years. So we got there's a wealth of stuff to be able to turn this into a movie. But to kind of give the tease of it is, so all the stuff I had shared about going to China.
Wait a second, you said embezzlement. That's such a key word. Wait, just touch on that, because that's the
How
rub
long
of
is
the
this
movie.
podcast going to be, man?
But that's why I said touch on it, because
Touch on it.
Because everything that you're saying or describing is very up here and grand and hopeful and positive, but the embezzlement is the crux of the story.
Well,
that's the inflection point that changes everything and is the super negative, down, horrible, shitty time of this whole period. So just describe that to 2 to 3 sentences.
Yeah, man. The embezzlement was, I was on such a high because I'd gone to China. I had signed these deals. Not only did I make the television memorandum of understanding turn into a full-blown contract, which was completely, again, never been done before in China, but I ended up then signing the very first deal ever with Ford in China to make content of this kind. I also signed with Apple I signed with Avis, and I signed with the United States government to make this show. And so I had pulled in $9 million in contracts, which, for a 31-year-old, that was
Sponsorship contracts.
Yeah, sponsorship contracts
In
and
2010.
broadcasting deals in 2010, 2011, and 2012. I signed the Ford deal in February of 2012, which was the big one. That was like, I signed the contract with Travel Channel of China, Hainan Weishur, and Ford the same month it was like March 2012. And it was just the best feeling in the world. I have a video of myself like cheersing in my little hotel room in 2012, just being shocked that I'd pulled this whole thing off. It wasn't like a little contract. This is a major contract and big dollars, $9 million in contracts of sponsorship.
A lot of
deals.
excitement in global production.
Yeah,
at that
nobody
time.
had done anything like this before. It was the first of its kind. And all of a sudden I went from being, like everyone was telling me, oh, you'll never be able to do this. You'll never be able to do this, to literally pretty much everyone I knew asking me for a job.
Love the naysayers.
No, it was. I actually loved the naysayers because I like the challenge. But it was
Keep
funny
naysaying.
seeing all those naysayers go from being naysaying to,
I always believed it would
hey,
happen.
I always knew it was going to happen. Of
course.
Can you get me a job? Can you get me a job? And so it switched over real fast. And next thing you know, I hired all these people. According to our producer, he said at one point we had like 100 people all in working for us. And so I built this like empire of production and of tourism preparation, and just had so many good pieces to it. Just all these great people. We met Colin and Sam. I love the story of how I met these guys. But that's that's a whole podcast right there. That deserves its own story, because it's frankly, it's one of the great stories of my life is how I met these two guys. Through
Yeah, it's
Alex
okay.
and Ryan.
It's okay.
It's awesome. It's
okay.
awesome. But anyways, so I built this kind of empire. And then the embezzlement. So yeah,
What is
was
the definition of embezzlement?
somebody taking money for personal things that they that are meant for the business, and hiding it from everyone.
Taking as in stealing?
As in
Stealing money from a business is
stealing money
more
from
or
a
less.
business. And so one of my employees, who was a very trusted and much loved person of mine, ended up stealing all of our liquid cash.
$9 million?
No, the liquid cash.
Oh.
So at the time it was $3 million in cash.
Gotcha.
Everything else was the contract stuff. And so ended up taking the cash and running off with it. And to this day, we never recovered a dime.
How do you trust someone after that?
You don't. No, you. How do you trust someone after that? You're changed. It changed me. It changed me from being somebody that openly trusted everyone and everything to being guarded. And I'm still guarded. There's a reason why with Mint, I've kept it a very small company. And I intend on keeping it small and growing as we absolutely need to with more people. And so many of those things are lessons learned from that time period. But
And needless to say that after that embezzlement, we were kind of unable to do what we had set out to do.
yeah, no, I had to fire every single person in the company, including myself. It's a very weird thing when you realize that you had a company that was worth, significant levels of money. There was at one point somebody put a valuation on us at $100 million. I don't know if that was true or not, but that was the number that I was given. I remember sitting on the rooftop of my giant house in the Hollywood Hills, and Zac Efron's coming over to a party at my house, and he's standing there on the roof of my house going, how did you get this house? This is such a great place. I hope that someday I can have a place like this. How do you go, from that kind of, building all these wonderful things and hiring all these great people. We had so many good people working for us to, a year later, I was driving an Uber car by myself, just trying to pay
And
for
that
gas.
was a really dark day when you had to reveal the information. Well, you were still in India trying to recover some money. So obviously India is a player
India
here.
plays its part.
Plays a part in this story, but from our perspective at the time, being so junior and not being so involved in those decisions and strategy sessions at the higher level, Sam and I, we saw it from the ground level, and I can say from memory, I'm sure I can speak for Sam too, that was a dark day from all we knew is that we were participating in making a television show that was supposed to be earth-shattering and groundbreaking in every sense of the word. And when it was revealed that, hey, this ain't going to happen, I don't think anyone had a dry eye in that room. Everyone was upset.
Yeah. All because of the actions of one person.
And
who
I'm talking
took
like
it all from us.
I remember in that room, there were a few dozen of us in there of all different varying positions of production and, production office people and everything in between, and actors. And
I remember that
at the
day
Hollywood
very
Hills,
well.
at this beautiful mansion in one of the Bird Streets, if you know the Bird Streets in LA, with $1 million view, like a house that the Entourage would scout to use in one of their episodes. And it's the irony being at the top of the world, literally, and then for all of it to be ripped from under you. And this is just us from our perspective. I mean, we didn't have the grander viewpoint that Brian did. So I can't even imagine. Well, he did tell us how he felt years later, but goddamn, we over time have built this awesome friendship. We've been able to hear all of the nitty gritty details.
Yeah, it's taken a while to kind of get them all out.
This will be a movie.
No, it has to be a movie at some point.
It's going to be hard to watch, but it's going to be very cathartic.
It will. It will. But, where this story's all going, though, is it does have some really beautiful moments following that. So that was all happened in 2012, 2013. But then by 2017, we were able to do it all over again, but with much better people. And then, that all led to today. And so, everything that happened with Sixtus, the production company, with the tourism company, with Elysium, the tourism company, and all that coming into that informed everything that's now happening at our company, Mint. Like, there's not a day that goes by that it isn't somehow influenced by what happened with China and India and tourism and television, and now what we're doing with this company. And I still want to do production. Like a lot of my plans for Mint and where this whole thing is going with this company is very heavy in the content side. Like the product is one thing, and I love our products. I can't wait to get those into the market very shortly. But man, all I can think about still is making the production and the content side. So
one day,
stay tuned, everyone.
We have our targets in terms of personnel and other things that we think can.
We have some really cool stuff planned for everyone.
But just
planned
like,
for ourselves. It's just going to be an amazing couple years ahead for us.
Yeah. Well said. I'm not going to say anything else about it.
Yeah, that's all we're going to tease for today. But thank you all for listening. Very much enjoyed having you today on Car Policy, where we can talk about anything because car policy is enabled.
Car policy. Oh, car policy is enabled. Did we ever talk about why it's car policy?
I think
have we
did
ever
in
talked
our
about
first episode.
I don't know.
I don't think we did.
We'll
but
talk about it in the third episode.
Yeah.
How about that?
Unless someone asks.
Okay. If you guys want to know, let us know.
Have a good
let
day,
us know.
guys.
Thanks, everyone.